who are your critics? And I imagine in the Catholic space you have critics, right, who want to really baptize the word feminism and are very upset with you probably that you're trying to demonize it. So what is could you try to steel man their arguments? Like, what are they saying?
Yeah. No, I think, I love the idea of debating this. I love the idea of talking about this. I love the idea of getting my arguments stronger and finding, let's poke holes in this. I just don't love it when it doesn't feel like they're really real arguments, But one of them there've been a few of them, but one of the arguments was that I didn't think that women were rational, which is kind of a strange thing to say.
I have a PhD.
Yeah.
Wrote a thesis.
In philosophy. Yeah. I kind of think it's important. I've spent most of my adult life studying philosophy, but, yeah, that was one argument. The other stuff hinged on.
Why did they say that?
Well, I mean, the bigger issue is just the main argument that Catholic feminists have been making is that the first wave is good, and they've really hinged their arguments.
And what do they think the first wave is saying?
There's this desire, there's this belief that the first wave is trying to get to a feminism of care. Which is really a fascinating concept, that it's really, it's trying to help women who are broken. Lovely idea. Do you want the Kamala Harris answer? Or do you want a very long answer? Because I could give both, but.
Would you like to give?
I don't really want to do a Kamala Harris impression.
Then do the long one. Yeah.
So the fundamental problem is that a feminism of care, I think it can be effective if you sort of cherry pick ideas from women and you don't really realize, from the early feminists, and you don't really realize the whole context and the whole ethos in which they're making their arguments. And I think that's what's actually been going on, is sort of this creating of a vision of what first wave feminism was without really understanding what it is. And the problem is Mary Wollstonecraft is, again, back to that idea of, she's trying to figure out what womanhood is. And she's basing a lot of her ideas, first of all, on Jean-Jacques Rousseau, as well as Thomas Paine. So Wollstonecraft has this experience where she's a teacher, she's trying to help women, and then she moves to London. And it's basically like, again, that girl who goes to college and she's got these new professors and they're giving her all these ideas and she's just filled to the brim with them. So what happens is the French Revolution breaks out, and Edmund Burke, who is really considered the founder of conservatism, he basically says this is going to be an absolute disaster. It's going to end up in major bloodshed. And the reason why is because you're trying to get rid of tradition and faith. And nobody believes him at the time. Everybody thinks, Edmund Burke, you're nuts. This is never going to be that bad. They were worried it was going to spread to England. And so he was really outspoken about it. Well, Mary Wollstonecraft is actually responding to him. And there's a book written by a man named Yuval Levin called The Great Debate. And he basically goes back to this debate between Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine and says that's really where the split happens, where we've got liberalism and conservatism. This is the nut.
Yeah.
So Wollstonecraft is fundamentally very much on the Thomas Paine side of things. And, they knew each other. They were on some committee together. She actually goes to Paris and is involved in, not in the killing, but she's watching the revolution. She knows where he lives. She calls him Tommy. This is one of the arguments was that they weren't connected, but they were very much connected. So what's fascinating is that from the very beginning, feminism isn't part of the, it's trying to get rid of tradition and faith. But and Burke knew this. You cannot have a culture of care without those pieces. Those are what create, that's the fabric that creates the capacity for people to care for each other, whether it's the family or whatnot. So juxtaposed, you have these very different personalities, and she ends up, ends up having a relationship with an American. They tell the French embassy that they're married so that she doesn't get massacred in the French Revolution. She's pregnant. She moves back to England. She tries to commit suicide a few times because that's what the Romantics did. That was a very popular thing to do. And she ends up getting married to this man named William Godwin, who's actually very well known as far as being, his ideas really affected Marx, really influenced Marx. And he was actually much better known. He was just kind of this intellectual celebrity at the time. And so they get married and they have a baby. Well, she dies 10 days later from childbirth. So this is kind of tragically her life ends. Edmund Burke, meanwhile, he ends up taking in all these orphans from people who had been guillotined in Paris. He's, saw that there was a need for all these children. He had an estate. He creates an orphanage for all these children to be taken care of. Like, it's just a very different, like the ways in which their lives played out. Now, I'm obviously not trying to make some sort of judgment about Mary Wollstonecraft per se, but I'm just pointing out that these are very stark differences in their approaches. And there's, do you know Ian McGilchrist, his work?
I don't think
The
so.
Master and His Emissary. Anyway, he's a Scotsman, and he's just an absolute delight. He's written that. He wrote that book, I think, about 10 years ago, and it's actually a really mind-blowing book. But he, in that book, says, the French Revolution was supposed to be just and fraternal and ordered.
Yeah.
And it was none of those things.
Right.
And this is what
It had nice
Burke.
language, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Fraternity, liberty.
Yeah, but then you've got, bishops hanging from lampposts and, the guillotine just nonstop, and so much death and destruction. And, it was just a disaster. And that's what Edmund Burke saw, was this is what's going to happen, because he knew when you take out faith and tradition, all you've got left is a power vacuum, or a vacuum for power to fill. So this is why he was so prescient and knew exactly what was going to happen. So all of that is a long backstory to say feminism has been, because the fact it's trying to get rid of faith and family, there's no way in which it can create that which it wants to create, because you're removing all the context through which care can actually happen, where you can protect your daughters and your family, and protect women from abuse and all of those kinds of things. It's a family that's and the larger family community that is, the pieces have to be in place for that to actually happen. So it's a great concept, but it just doesn't work given the threads that our feminism is built with.
It reminds me of how the New Atheism, Christopher Hitchens and others, would think that once we abolish religion, there will be an ascendance of reason. Yeah. And now there are women with penises.
Yeah,
How
exactly.
did that happen?
Terribly reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. What?
Yeah. No.
Men can be pregnant? Like, that happened quickly? So it's like there's something similar there. Like, you remove the faith and you remove the tradition, and it turns out you're left with, babble.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's this, as Ian McGilchrist would say, there's this grasping at ideas, but there's not enough context for the ideas to. It's the difference between what something is and how it becomes that which it is. Okay. One is very one-dimensional, and the other is very much understanding the nature of it, how it was created, and how it flourishes. But, back to your planted flower example, like it's and unfortunately, this is really the pattern of liberalism. Really, it's just we have these really great ideas, but we don't know how to achieve them because we don't understand the nature of it. So that's why things always end up so bloody and broke and such a disaster.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.